Why I started collecting the water, I will never quite know. I guess that book about the end of the world pricked my conscience. Then there was the news stories about the tensions in the East, and that president, well, he seemed like he didn't want peace in the first place. I didn't think it was going to happen, but unlike most, I believed it could. More importantly, I took measures in case it did. And well, it did. So I started picking up multi-packs of 2-litre bottles of water. I did this for several weeks after work. Also, I picked up 4 tins of beans each time and carried my cargo back to my flat and stored it in my wardrobe, hoping nobody would find out. Preparing for the end of the world isn't considered normal. Well, how bloody unnormal of everyone. 3 weeks later, my walk-in wardrobe was looking a lot smaller. It contained 96 litres of water and 48 tins of beans. I wasn't planning for Armageddon, I just wanted a peace of mind. And it was working. Well, that was until the Friday before it happened. My friends were around on a Friday evening, you know the kind. There was Steve Barrett, Daniel Sadler, Scott Fisher and my flatmate Tom Johnson. The TV blared out our usual rock, AC/DC, a little Pink Floyd and the Foo Fighters. Cold beers dripped down our gullets, and it was our usual Friday until Steve walked into my room looking for my acoustic guitar. He found it, along with other things. "What the fuck is this?" he shouted, and so the lads came running in. Soon all 4 of them was pointing and laughing, big laughs exacerbated by coke and vodka. I remember smiling, so the cat was out of the bag, and there was no point in lying. Even now I can't think of a less embarrassing excuse. "Preparation, boys." "Preparation for what?" said Scott, gazing at my beans. "Let's just say I'll be ready. You won't. So don't come knocking on my door if it does happen." "What you talking about?" said Steve. I stared at the clear plastic and lowered my voice, turning to them in the lamplight of my room. They reminded me of the 4 horsemen of the apocalypse. "The end," I said. They looked at each other and laughed. I think Tom, my flatmate, spilled his beer on my rug. I laughed too and said, "You've been warned. It's not going to happen, but if it does, don't you think it's worth a little consideration?" "Nah," said Daniel. "If it does, I know where to come, don't I?" "If it happens, we won't see each other again." "Bollocks. Imagine a nuke dropped on the States," I went on trying to correct him. "They obliterate the culprits. Then, in blind fear, neighbouring nations decide they must nuke other nations to ensure their safety. To put it simply, everything would stop, at best change. Everything." "I think we'll be fine," said Steve, rather blasé, looking out the corner of his brown eyes at the others. "Consider it. Let's imagine half this nation's goods are imported, mainly our food. Well, that stops. The other half, they can't get what they want, so they stop. Soon there's no food anywhere. People begin to fight, wide-scale riots, and fight all over the nation like you've never imagined." I realised then I was shouting, and my arms were wide open like my eyes. My friends burst out laughing with tears dripping from their eyes. "It's actually happened. You've lost it. The end. It's coming, man. You'll be sorry," says Scott, putting on a deranged American accent, like the loon you always see in End of the World films. Nobody ever believes that guy. But then, it happens. It always happens. I can't tell you exactly what happened on that day. What I can tell you is that some place on this planet all hell broke loose. Millions of men, women and children died, vaporised. Then radioactivity changed the DNA of millions for hundreds of miles around, resulting in agonising deaths. Cities and civilisations vanished in seconds. How many perished we will never know, at least not for many years. Where it happened, I cannot be sure, but I envision a vaporised Far East and Eastern United States. But I didn't see that. I was watching the film Fight Club on the BBC iPlayer. And then the TV faded to black. I reached for the remote thinking I had accidentally turned it off, but the TV didn't look off, just dark grey. I pointed the remote at the television and the picture faded back in. But Tyler Durden was gone. She had crept into the room and she was staring at me, the Prime Minister. She was scared, I knew it. And she appeared in some fancy room I assumed was 10 Downing Street. She didn't speak for some time and seemed to be watching someone behind the camera. Then slowly she opened her thin lips. "To anyone across the world who may be watching this broadcast, I bring you grave news." She paused for some time. Immediately I sprung up and moved to the edge of the sofa. Looking her straight in the eye, I knew her next words were history. At approximately 11:43, numerous nuclear warheads were detonated in the Pacific. As for the culprits and the reasons, we can only speculate. But we do know currently destruction like the world has never seen is taking place. The death toll will be in the millions. Sorry, tens of millions. I was absorbed. I felt as if I was in the same room as the Prime Minister. Now I speak to the people of the United Kingdom. No declaration of war or acts of aggression have been made against our nation. Our military is on the highest alert. We will do everything in our power to protect our people. What I say next is of the utmost importance. We must remain calm. I cannot express this enough. This is integral to our future and our way of life. As we get more information, we'll be in contact with broadcasts like this one. Let me assure you, your nation and this government has made prior arrangements for this awful circumstance we find ourselves in. All will be taken care of. We, as people, have always managed in times of adversity. Let me once again assure you, we are doing all we can. Keep calm and carry on, Britain. Thank you. Then the TV faded to black. Again. The next thing I knew, my phone was in my hand and I was dialing my mum. Then I heard a woman's voice, but it came from someone posher and more robotic than my mother. Sorry, but the number you are trying to reach is unavailable at this time. Please try again later. The TV faded in again, and a black and white picture of a forest appeared on the screen. Classical music played. I believe it was Beethoven, or maybe Vivaldi. Whoever it was, the music is called Four Seasons. I listened to the optimistic violins and read the words on the centre of the screen. Keep calm and carry on, it said in red writing. It didn't offer much comfort. I opened up Facebook Messenger on my phone, but the orange banner appeared on the top and it said, waiting for network. I looked at the Wi-Fi box below the TV and it appeared to be on. So I tried to Google the word cat. Again, it said I was offline. It appeared the internet had been cut off. I scanned through the TV channels and it was weird. They'd all disappeared but one, BBC One, but it was now called British Broadcaster One. And again it showed that creepy looking forest with the words in red on the screen. Keep calm and carry on. Reality began to set in. My heart began to beat as I got to my feet. I paced the room and ran my hands through my thinning hair. All I could think about was my mum, dad and 6-year-old sister. They lived in Gainsborough, 40 miles away, in a small town I grew up in. I tried my phone a couple more times, but it was useless. An hour later the door exploded open. I turned my head away from the TV and there he was, sweating, panting with the sun behind him, leaving him a silhouette. Fuck me. Tom had left work when he saw the Prime Minister on the many TVs in the electronics shop he worked in. He obviously hadn't got the message. What are we going to do? What the hell are we going to do? Is this it? I don't know, maybe. People are already fighting outside Tesco. I saw a mob trying to get to a guy in a car, but... Tom's eyes glazed over and he came and sat beside me on the sofa. He didn't stop. There were bodies everywhere. When he heard that, my stomach sank. Then Tom looked at me and smiled, a small smile. One that made him look crazy. You, he said, pointing. You have them supplies. You genius, you little genius, he said, getting up. We need water, don't we? He went over to the kitchen tap and pulled the lever. It spat some water, then nothing. Already? I said in disbelief. What? Said Tom, as I moved close to the kitchen sink. I stared at the tap and looked at our oblong, distorted reflections and thought how it was a true reflection of the world. Just strange. Survival. Hundreds, maybe thousands of people have got the same idea half an hour ago. The problem is, as soon as we have an idea, it's already too late. At some point, all our lights turned off along with the TV. The power had been cut, and we sat in a room with nothing but the moonlight. In the dead of night, distant screams could be heard. We didn't admit it, but every time we heard voices outside our door, we were scared. Really scared. Okay, if someone tries to get in, we get them knives and we just go for it. Don't think, whoever it is. Tom said this with the moonlight in his eyes. In them I saw the world for what it now was. Over the next few days we ate 2 tins of beans each day, every day. 1 in the morning and 1 at night, and we had 4 glasses of water each. I was always hungry, and remember them long silences. They amplified the empty stomachs. Looking back now, it feels like it was always night, but neither of us seemed to sleep. It was after about a week something happened. Our ears had grown highly attuned to the outside noises. As we sat on the sofa around midnight, we heard steps coming from outside. Instinctively, we looked at each other. We listened and heard whispers outside our door. I took the 2 kitchen knives from beside the TV and put one in Tom's cold palm. He stayed on the sofa and I watched him breathe deeply. He watched me walk down the dark corridor that leads to our door. Slowly, I approached. I could hear whispers from outside getting louder. It was like they were arguing. It sounded like a woman and a man. I put my eyes slowly to the peephole, then the door rattled. I heard more arguing, then listened to steps move away and whispers become distant. The next thing I heard was my heartbeat pounding inside my chest. As I turned and looked down the corridor, I could see Tom. He was stood up holding the knife that glimmered in the moonlight from our far window. The next night we could hear voices from the street below. I crept up to the living room window. The setting sun still shone slightly, and for the first time in days I saw other people. There was a group of men, about 8 of them. Each carried a baseball bat or cricket bat, and on them were stains. The stain looked black, but I quickly realised it was blood. They all had rucksacks on too, and cuts covered their bodies. I realised then we were back in the animal kingdom. They were a pack, and I assumed they were surviving by attacking the vulnerable. "Shit," I whispered. Tom came over, crouching low and peering up through the window, and looked down at the street below. Shit. Do you think they're coming in here?" "If they are, we're dead." It surprised me how easily I said this, but from spending a week with no stimulation and hardly any food, I was feeling pretty numb. "But if they don't, we must leave." "What?" said Tom, as we sat side by side on the floor below the window. "That's just going to be the beginning. Soon the city's going to be controlled by gangs like that. Until one rules supreme. They will kill everyone who's not with them, take whatever they want. They will keep doing this, and if we stay here, we will be eventually found by them, or people like them." Tom didn't argue. He looked at the gap between his legs. I took his silence as agreement. I got up and got my rucksack from my room. In it was a 2-man tent. I re-entered the living room and looked at Tom, who was deflated. "What we need is numbers, but the only people we can trust are 40 miles away in our hometown." "You can't be serious." "Oh, believe me, I'm more than serious. I'm heading out tonight." I'll just be honest, we were frightened, a deep fear that cooks your insides. As we stood in that hallway, in the complete dark waiting to leave, Tom wouldn't look at me. I don't think he wanted to look at anything living. Somehow it was easier that way. I had my rucksack on. Inside it was a cheap 2-man tent, a couple jumpers and 2 2-litre bottles of water. Tom had a rucksack too, a little bigger than mine, with more water and beans inside. Both bags had in their top pocket our kitchen knives. Weird that before this happened, they were both our knives. Now we each had our own. Mine was smaller but stronger. I remember thinking it would be best to go for the throat. How horrible I once thought about that. We were poorly prepared, but we weren't prepared to die. There was a flicker of hope. As I put my hand on the door handle to leave, I let out a deep sigh. "I just want to say, don't you dare," he said, still refusing to look at me, while staring at the floor, looking angrier than I'd ever seen him before. I thought about responding, just saying, I wanted to say good luck or maybe it's been great, but as I watched his torn face that reminded me of a rabid dog, I decided silence was golden. I put my hand on the cold metal handle and opened the door to the unknowing darkness. As we left the flat, a silence remained. As we walked out the city, we saw a lot of things, a lot of smoke, fire and glass. But that was nothing really. We saw a lot of dead children. It's painful to say that. I had seen a dead body before once when I worked in a care home for 6 months. That person was old and lay peacefully in a warm bed, but seeing that first child face first on the cold concrete road with an arm hanging near the gutter, I don't think I'll ever see something so awfully moving again. When we saw him, we both stopped. We stared. His top half was naked and his skin was unbelievably pale, almost white, reflecting the colour of the moon. The only movement was from his long brown hair that moved in the howling wind. It mimicked life. No, mocked it. As we watched him laying there, I wanted to find his mum. Where was she? Who was she? Why was he so alone? As we stood in the dark with this child, with no name, We both cried. I noticed then Tom was looking at me again. I think he wanted to see life. Somehow it made things easier. Full of shame we continued our journey, past more death and destruction. Soon the incredibly dark city became a darker countryside. There was a kinder silence there. It felt purer. We followed the road we knew well that headed to our hometown, but we didn't walk on it. We walked maybe 30 metres parallel to it, through woodland and long grass. We were scared of a gang of men coming up the road and seeing us. We didn't want our blood on their bats. And after a few hours of walking, we took a seat by a river in the long grass that came up to our thighs. "Shall we pitch up?" I asked Tom. "I think so. My back's in agony." He unloaded the water and then collapsed on the soft grass. From the sound of the bag, I realised how much heavier it was than mine, and I felt a little bad. We were a little worried about it, but we got out my little torch. Tom flicked on the light and held it on me as I began to take out the tent and flatten some of the grass. "You think they will be there?" said Tom. I knew he meant family. It was a question I'd asked myself 100 times but never dared to actually try and answer it. "I'm not sure." I didn't want to think about it. I didn't want to imagine my little sister under the moonlight. A little more time passed as I fumbled for tent pegs and poles. "You know what?" said Tom. "What?" "Fishing." "Fishing? I think that could be the way to do it," he said, shining the light towards the river which we couldn't see. "That's great, but unfortunately I can't see," I said, but he interrupted me. "Well, you just need a rod, and once that you've got an almost unlimited food source." "No, not that. I can't see what I'm doing." "Oh, sorry," said Tom, turning the light back towards me. We laughed, and I could see the smile on his face. Given the circumstances, it was kind of beautiful. I concentrated on the way the corner of his mouth and eyes wrinkled and upturned. It was a little gift, but then it vanished, and he was staring at something over my shoulder. The light began to shake, and I watched Tom try to whisper something, but the words wouldn't come out. "Nobody move," I heard behind me. I slowly turned my head, and I was looking down the barrel of a gun. In the torchlight, I was looking at what I would describe as a normal-looking guy for my part of the world, about 5'10", brown hair, eager eyes, and in his 20s. But the details told a deeper story. He was wearing almost a beard, something that didn't suit him. His eyes looked wired like fire, but beneath them was a darkness, something that looked tired and strained. Beside him was a girl. She was skinny and resembled a teenage boy. But I think it was just the effect of the end of civilization on femininity. But the weirdest thing, the most obvious thing, he was holding a gun. I don't think I'd ever seen a gun until that point, and it was pointed at my forehead. I expected him to talk like a Yank from the southern states. I guess I'd seen too many films. But as he tried to speak, the words didn't come. "Ask them, Robert. No, tell them, Robert," said his girlfriend, shivering with her elbows in her hands. With every passing second, I realised how bad their situation was. The torchlight did not reveal much, but there wasn't much. They looked like skeletons in the dark. "You're going to give me them bags, okay, mate? Sorry, but," he said, quivering from fear or the cold. I couldn't be sure. "But if you don't, well, I'll blow your fucking head off. Sorry." I watched the gun shake and the desperation in his eyes. I wasn't going to question him. I stood up slowly with my hand in the air and began to back away, and Tom did the same. All four eyes were locked upon each other. There was a moment's pause. All that was left for them was to take our bags. "Well, what are you waiting for?" said Tom. I felt petrified. The gun was still on me. "Okay, we're doing it. Grab him, Pip," said the guy with the gun. His girlfriend crept forward with her eyes half on us, half on the goods. She reached down and put her hands on the rucksack. Then it all turned dark. "Hey, what are you doing? Turn that light on! Turn it on now!" screamed Robert. "Robbie?" said the girl. It was the last thing I heard before. I dropped into the grass and covered my ears that began to hurt and ring. I took my hands off my ears and heard a woman screaming. Her voice tore through the night, and I could hear men fighting in the pitch black. "Tom!" I shouted, but I couldn't work out where they were. I heard crunching, the sound of bone on bone, and the vocal noises getting quieter and quieter, more gruesome. Then the light came back on. Tom was standing over Robert, with the gun in one hand and the torch in the other. Robert was laid in the green grass. A deep red covered his face as blood dripped from his mouth and nose. "Please don't kill me," said Robbie weakly, spitting out blood onto the grass. I realised then how hurt he was. "It wasn't personal. We haven't eaten in days. I didn't want to hurt you. It's just if we didn't do something, we were going to die." Robert's bottom lip trembled. I realised then mankind's only chance was to look after one another. Until ordinary people started doing that, nothing but cruelty would plague the earth. "You bastard!" came a scream from our side. Like a running skeleton, she came at Tom, and in a flash and a bang, she was laying down beside her boyfriend. She was close to him, one hand on her stomach and the other on her boyfriend's face. I watched Robert whisper sorry, and they began to cry together. We watched them tell each other they loved one another, and she drifted away. "Shoot me," said Robert, and without a second thought, Tom raised the gun and shot Robert. We looked at the bodies, then Tom turned off the torch, and in the dark all I heard was, "We don't want to attract more attention." I realised then 3 people had died that night. The walk over the next couple of days was unspectacular. We barely spoke and didn't see a soul. No cars on the roads felt strange, and I remember seeing a lot of animals, like they knew us humans had fucked it up, and now it was their time to shine. Good for you, I remember thinking, as I watched a deer jog across a green field. As we approached our childhood town full of memories and loved ones, there was nothing to attract us. There was no black cloud in a literal sense. It was quite sunny, but it was there in our minds. Once I used to think a predictable future, living in a town where nothing changes, was the worst of things. Well, when the world turns dark, it becomes one of the most beautiful things. How I now long for that. Tom's mum lived in a small bungalow on the edge of town, opposite a big park. It was the first place we came to, and we stood in the car park opposite her house and looked at the door for some time that morning. It was quiet, just like it was before anything had happened. "You all right?" I asked him. "Yeah," he said. "Do you want me to wait here?" No, come with me," he said, walking down the garden path. The door handle was locked. "That's probably a good thing," I said. I was scared for him. He looked through the window into the living room, and he saw nothing. "Stay here 1 sec," he said. He walked around the back of the flats, and after a short time he came back with the key. Not everything's changed," he said, putting in the key and turning the handle. I had been here before. It was a nice little place, and from what I could see everything seemed in order. I stood in the centre room of the bungalow as he quickly checked the kitchen, living room and his bedroom. The last room to check was his mother's, which was at the back of the house. He told me to wait in his old room, to my left. I entered the little box room with a double bed pushed up against the far wall, took off my rucksack and planted it beside the door, and sat on the bed waiting for my friend. After about 15 minutes he re-entered his old room, staring at the floor. He put down the rucksack and the gun beside mine. "There's food in the kitchen," he said, walking slowly to the bed. He sat down close beside me, and for the first time I saw him cry. I put my arm around him, and he moved his head in towards my body, and he cried there for some time. Later that evening we cooked. There was actually beers in the fridge, and we whipped up an omelette. The ingredients weren't the freshest, but given the circumstances, it was delicious, thanks to Tom's cooking abilities, not mine. As we sat in that little kitchen, full of omelette and biscuits, Tom left the candle-lit kitchen and re-entered with a bottle of whiskey. "My dad loved the stuff," he said, taking tumblers from the cupboard and sitting back at the table. "Ugh, remember the last time we did this?" I said. "Oh yes, Michael Jackson tunes and the worst hangover I ever remember. Wasn't you been sick all afternoon?" "Yeah, till about 2 I remember, laying in bed craving ice poles because I couldn't stomach the water." "Oh yeah, isn't that when we discovered them little beauties for £1? They were delicious." "Yeah, that was it. I guess sometimes you need awful things to happen to discover the little beautiful things, the simple pleasures." I guess you're right. How many of them ice poles do you think we've eaten?" "I would say a good couple 100. I always had the green ones, remember, and you always had the orange ones." "Yeah, it was like an unwritten contract." "Yeah. You got any mixer for this? Coke or lemonade?" "Afraid not. I checked earlier." "Straight it is then. I heard water actually enhances the taste." "Really?" "Yeah, but to be honest, I think that's crap you read on the internet. I don't really care. Pour me some." I watched the amber liquid fill up the glass. The The aroma of whiskey raised up through my nostrils. I think it was then, for the first time, I truly understood how fucking messed up this world was. But it was okay. Sitting there in the warm with food in the cupboards and a drink in our hand gave me a chance to truly appreciate the situation. "Should we raise a glass?" I asked. "To what?" "Life." When I said that, I realised how insensitive it was, but Tom surprised me. "To life," he said, touching his glass against mine. We chucked back the drink and winced a little more. "You didn't have to down it," said Tom, smiling. "I wanted to." We drank and drank, and without music to fill the gaps, we spoke and spoke. What we spoke about I can't remember. I can't remember going to bed either. I do remember waking up, though, as the first glimmer of daylight entered his bedroom. Tom wasn't in the bed, and I noticed the gun was gone. Tom shot himself that morning in his mother's room. I'm sure he was beside her as it happened, but I will never quite know. I heard the gunshot as I stood outside her door. I couldn't bring myself to go in. Even though my mind told me how important that gun was, I just couldn't do it. I didn't cry for some reason. I simply took some biscuits from the kitchen, drank lots of water, picked up my bag and left the house and headed home. I walked through the little town, and in a way, it was hard to tell civilization had halted. The town had always seemed a little behind anyway. There wasn't the smashed glass or the black remnants of fire everywhere like there had been in the city. It just seemed abandoned. I made my way uphill, through the deserted streets, and soon I was outside my parents' house. The car was missing, which filled me with a weird hope. Perhaps they had left, perhaps they were still alive somewhere, anywhere. But as I approached the semi-attached house and opened the door, my heart sank. Inside, everything was smashed, the cupboards ransacked, and almost everything was gone. Just bits of old post and random papers were on the floor beneath the drawers that had been emptied. It was obvious nobody was home. I didn't know how to feel. Rather nastily, I felt exactly the same. As I took a seat on the sofa and contemplated, I heard something. It came from the attic. It was a bang. I stood up, and my highly attuned senses heard another noise too. A car had pulled up outside. As I left the living room, I saw through the window a group of men in the street in my peripheral vision. I stormed up the stairs and pulled the attic latch. The door swung open. I jumped and wrapped my fingertips onto the attic ledge and heaved my body upwards. And there was my little sister, cowering in the corner. Beside her was an empty bottle of water. The front door opened, and I shut the attic door. "Shit," I said, hoping they hadn't heard. I ran to my sister and held her close. As I held her tight, I wished for that gun, but it was too late. I could hear them coming up the stairs. "Where's Mummy and Daddy?" asked my little sister. "Shh," I said, putting my hand over her mouth. Then the attic door opened. Big brown eyes looked at mine and smiled. It was my friend Steve. "I told you everything would be all right,"